Today, we're talking through 3 not so obvious retirement roadblocks that could be in your future. Stick around. So today we're talking about 3 not so obvious retirement roadblocks. And we did a previous episode on retirement regrets. That's looking backwards. And this one's looking more forward about what's coming up in our road to retirement and how can we address that? Because unfortunately, not all of us can handle a roadblock like Elliot and E.T. did in the movie E.T. when they just took flight right over the roadblock and made it real easy. We unfortunately have to deal with these things and try to plan around it. So the first one, Allison, is the sequence of return risk.
That's exactly right. So we have an podcast episode on this as well. And the order of your returns matters. So having an 8% rate of return over 30 years, we don't always experience the same result. 2 people have very different investment experiences. So there's the potential to outlive your money if a poor sequence of returns happens early in retirement. There's also the potential for pretty extreme upside if you have really strong returns early in retirement. So we want to balance those and create a diversified portfolio and an allocation strategy that's appropriate for your financial plan. And really what we want to avoid is the need to sell stocks to meet cash flow needs early in retirement. So the ways we mitigate that is, developing that financial plan, making sure we know what your risk capacity is, how much money we expect you to need from the portfolio, and then building a diversified portfolio, which I compare to a very balanced diet. So we want to make sure that you got your protein, your fruits, your vegetables, and we're not having too much of those sometimes foods like sweets and alcohol, which, I would call those individual stocks or GameStop, Bitcoin, things like that. So we want to build that balanced retirement diet to help you reach peak financial fitness.
Yeah, I really like the way you laid that out in our longer podcast episode. And then you can also check out that episode she referenced on sequence of return risk. We'll put the link here in the video that you can go check that out. Our second roadblock is the inflation idea and how that can be a silent assassin throughout retirement.
So a lot of times in retirement, we don't anticipate how much the cost of goods is going to rise. And as Chad mentioned, there's always trade-offs. So if we want lower risk in our investment portfolio, that might mean that we have lower return. We don't keep up pace with inflation. We might not be able to purchase as much over the long term. And a lot of times what we think about heading into retirement is that we're either going to spend less or we're going to spend the same, and it's just going to increase every single year at the pace of inflation. Really what we see in reality is what we call a retirement smile spending pattern. So we call it the go-go years early in retirement, the slow-go years, which tend to go between, maybe 75, 85, somewhere around that, those markers, and then your no-go years later in retirement. So what tends to happen with spending is, higher spending in those go-go years tends to taper off in the slow-go years and increase back with healthcare costs in those no-go years later in retirement towards the end of life. So we want to be able to plan for that and make adjustments accordingly.
Again, the financial plan, a huge benefit here because you can understand what those go-go years may look like and scenario plan out a bit to address how much you're going to need on that risky side of your portfolio throughout retirement. Because the reality is we can all be scared moving into retirement about the transition from no longer saving and then starting to withdraw and feeling like you could run out of money because you no longer have money going into that portfolio. So that's where that plan can address some of those concerns and fears. And then our third one is one we talk about in a lot of our episodes, and it's those unforeseen tax bombs that can exist from rules of thumb that we've heard and makes us think are the best ways to handle this.
Yes. So the one we harped on a lot was taking Social Security too early, which we refer to in the Social Security tax bubble, episode 101. And how Social Security is taxed, how pension income is taxed. Obviously, it's ordinary income tax. We might not anticipate that might not be the best tax efficient strategy over the long run. When we look at that financial plan, we want to look at limiting your overall lifetime tax liability, not just this specific year. Something else we see people experience sometimes is unforeseen tax implications on inheritances. Particularly if they inherit an annuity or some cash value life insurance from their parents. A lot of times that is the case in your 60s and 70s. So if you receive something like that, you want to be careful before you take a distribution or make withdrawals, that you analyze what's the best way to deal with this. Should it be done all at once? Do I have a time period that I can look at taken this out over a course of time, or is there something else I can do with it to limit the tax liability?
So 3 roadblocks there, not so obvious, potentially roadblocks to watch for and try to plan for in the way that you're approaching your retirement. Again, we have many other episodes here on the channel that you can check out. You could subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one, or check out many of our articles at financialsymmetry.com. Thanks for joining us today.